For Mizrahi Heritage Month, we commemorate the 1 million Jewish refugees who were expelled from the Middle East and North Africa just less than a century ago. While a series of massacres, persecutions, and expulsions these Jews faced is parallel to other Jewish experiences in the rest of the world, little is said about the ethnic cleansing of these Jews, also known as Mizrahi Jews. In fact, there has been little to no international recognition of their expulsion by these countries, nor has it been acknowledged by the United Nations. So who are the Mizrahi Jews? The Jewish diaspora began over 2,000 years ago with the Syrian invasion of the Kingdom of Israel, and then the Babylonian exile when the Babylonians destroyed the first temple, and again in the 2nd century when the Romans colonized the land of Israel, renamed it to Palestine after the Jews' former enemies from Greece, and exiled most of the Jews from Judea. Although most Jews were exiled, many also stayed in their homeland of Israel but lived under foreign rule and occupation. As a consequence of these exiles and other forced displacements from their indigenous homeland, Jews spread to countries all over the world. But those who ended up in the East, in countries like Iraq and Iran, and in North African countries like Morocco and Tunisia, would later become known as Mizrahi Jews. Like Jews who spent their diaspora in other parts of the world, Mizrahi Jews also yearn to go back home to Israel, continuing to direct their daily prayers, facing Jerusalem, and maintaining their ancient traditions. And while they were loyal citizens who contributed greatly to the cultural, financial, and political development of the countries in which they resided in, they preserved their Jewish identity and were always clearly seen as a separate and distinct people. As Islam began spreading in the 7th century, Jews living under Muslim rule in these countries suffered from various forms of discrimination and were considered dhimmis, or second-class citizens, in which they were forced to pay special taxes, suffered from discriminatory legislation, and had restrictions on what they could wear, including prohibitions of their traditional Jewish clothing, like the sudra. Jews were also forbidden to ride horses or camels. They were excluded from public office and military service, and their homes and synagogues were not allowed to be taller than those of the Muslim population. Many Jews were also forced to convert. This was the reality even though Jews were living in the region about 1,000 years before the rise of Islam and more than 2,500 years before the establishment of modern Arab nations. By the 20th century, as Nazi ideology spread to the Middle East, Jews found themselves facing some of the most violent and vicious attacks. Arab leaders like the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem personally met with Hitler, persuading him to extend their extermination plans to the Middle East. Hitler's manifesto was also translated to Arabic, and anti-Semitic laws in the region were put into place, forcing Jews into labor, punishment, and isolation camps, which were approved by countries like Algeria and Tunisia, and informally approved by Morocco. The extreme violence and oppressive laws resulted in the mass expulsion of 1 million Jews from these Arab and Muslim countries. These Jewish refugees forcefully fled their ancient diaspora homes penniless, leaving all their possessions behind. $300 billion worth of property was stolen and lost, and priceless cultural property continues to be held illegally by some of these countries. Jews were also slaughtered in public hangings, their houses looted and synagogues burned down, while also subjected to anti-Jewish riots and Nazi-inspired pogroms backed by their governments. In Iraq, Jews were murdered, raped, and looted in a pogrom known as the Farhud. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion was translated to Arabic and distributed, and pro-Nazi slogans were written on walls in public areas such as "Hitler was killing the Jewish germs." Anti-Semitic propaganda was broadcasted routinely, with Iraqi politicians openly expressing they wanted Jews expelled, which all led to this pogrom. In 1948, there were 150,000 Jews in Iraq. Today, there are only 4 left. In Libya, where oppressive laws existed since 1938, thousands of Jews were transported to desert concentration camps called the Giotto camp, and hundreds of Jews with foreign citizenship were sent to concentration camps in Europe. There were tens of thousands of Jews in Libya in 1948. Today, not a single Jew remains there. Oujda in Morocco also experienced extremely violent anti-Jewish riots and bloody pogroms, which led to hundreds of thousands of Jews escaping Morocco. In Egypt, Syria, and Yemen, Jewish quarters and Jewish-owned businesses were burned down, and Jews were denied their citizenship. From 1949 to 1950, Israel enacted Operation Magic Carpet to rescue the Jews from Yemen from persecution. Today, there are no Jews left in Yemen or in Syria. Most of the Jews in Iran, a country which once had one of the largest ancient Jewish communities, had escaped during the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Mizrahi Jewish contributions to the growth of these countries were essential, and their traditions and legacy must be preserved. Neither the United Nations nor any other international agency has addressed these Jewish refugees nor demanded restitution for their property. There was no UNRWA created to help these Jewish refugees, nor has any country been held accountable. And if it weren't for Israel saving these refugees, they would have been persecuted. Today, the descendants of these refugees now account for the majority of Israel's Jewish population.